Axl Rose was tidying up the attic of his Malibu mansion when an old cardboard box tipped over, spilling its contents across the wooden floor. Among rolled-up posters, crumpled set lists, and blurry photographs of forgotten concerts, something caught his attention. It was a Rolling Stone magazine from June 1987, with yellowed pages and the unmistakable smell of old paper. He was about to throw it in the trash when he noticed something strange in one of the margins. Someone had written in black marker, in feminine and decisive handwriting, "Axl, music has to come from the soul, not the ego. Never forget it. Valerie S." Axl's heart stopped. That name, those words, it had been more than 35 years since he'd thought about Valerie Sinclair, the only girl who had rejected him when Guns N' Roses was about to conquer the world. The girl who one night in 1987, at the Troubadour in Los Angeles, had told him something that no one else dared to tell him, the words that had been buried in some dark corner of his memory until this precise moment. Axl held the magazine with trembling hands. The written letters had faded a bit over time, but the message was still there, intact, waiting for him. Where would Valerie be now? What had become of that girl with penetrating eyes, who saw something in him that he didn't even see in himself? And what he was about to discover would not only answer those questions, but would forever change his understanding of success, fame, and what it really means to leave a mark on this world. It was a quiet Sunday in November. Outside, the Pacific waves crashed against the coast with their eternal rhythm. Axl came down from the attic with the magazine in his hands and sat on the leather sofa in his living room, completely absorbed in that piece of paper that had traveled more than 3 decades to find him right now. The cover showed another band from that era, one that didn't even exist anymore. But what mattered was that message scrawled in the margin, those words that resonated with more force now than when they were written. Axl closed his eyes and let memory drag him back. June 1987. Los Angeles burned under the brutal heat of the California summer. Guns N' Roses was just weeks away from releasing Appetite for Destruction, but they were still relatively unknown outside the Sunset Strip Club circuit. That night they were playing at the Troubadour, a legendary but small venue that held maybe 400 people packed in. The air was dense, a mixture of cigarette smoke, sweat, spilled beer, and pure electricity. Axl had noticed a girl from the first song. She was in the second row, not pushing to be at the front like the others, but maintaining her space with an almost disconcerting calm. She had short brown hair, a denim jacket covered in punk and metal band patches, and something in her gaze that radiated a different intensity. She wasn't screaming his name. She wasn't trying to get his attention. She was simply there, completely immersed in the music, with her eyes closed during Slash's solos, her lips barely moving with the lyrics. Axl spit into the microphone. When the show ended and adrenaline still ran through his veins like liquid fire, Axl saw her sitting alone at a table at the back of the bar. She had a worn notebook open in front of her and was writing something with absolute concentration, oblivious to the chaos surrounding her. Axl wiped the sweat with a towel and walked toward her with the arrogant confidence of someone who had just set a stage on fire. "Hi, I'm Axl." She looked up without surprise, as if she had been waiting for him to approach. "I know. I'm Valerie." Her voice was calm, confident. "What are you writing?" "Lyrics, poetry, things I'll probably never show anyone." Axl smiled with that crooked smile that usually worked. He sat in the chair in front of her without being invited. "I liked how you were listening up there. Not like the usual groupies. You were really listening." Valerie slowly closed the notebook and looked him straight in the eyes. "That's because the music matters. Not the circus around it, the music." Axl felt something strange, discomfort mixed with curiosity. This girl was different. "We should go out sometime," he said, direct, no beating around the bush. "Get a drink, talk about music, lyrics, whatever." Valerie observed him for a few seconds that seemed like minutes. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of sadness and clarity that Axl couldn't decipher. Then she smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knows something you don't know yet. "I can't, Axl." Axl frowned, puzzled. No one said no to him, especially not after a show like that. Why not? Because you're about to be huge, she said with a certainty that disturbed him. I see it. I feel it. It's in you. And when that happens, you're going to get lost. You're going to forget why you started playing. You're going to forget who you are underneath all the noise. And I don't want to be around when that happens. Axl felt a wave of rage mixed with confusion. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Valerie responded calmly. She opened her notebook, carefully tore out a blank page, and wrote something on it. Then she folded it and handed it to him. When you get to where you're going to get, read it. Maybe it'll make sense then. Before Axl could respond, Valerie stood up, grabbed her worn backpack, and walked toward the exit without looking back. Axl sat there, holding the folded paper, feeling strangely empty despite the euphoria of the show. That night he had been rejected, and for some reason he didn't understand. It hurt more than any music criticism. He opened the paper. It said, "Music has to come from the soul, not the ego. Never forget it." Valerie S. Axl crumpled the paper, put it in his leather jacket pocket, and never thought about it again. Or so he believed. The following months were an unstoppable hurricane. Appetite for Destruction was released in July, and at first sales were lukewarm. But by December, something had exploded. Welcome to the Jungle was playing on every radio in the country. Sweet Child O' Mine reached #1. Suddenly, Guns N' Roses wasn't just a band, it was a phenomenon. World tours, magazine covers, wild parties that lasted for days, excesses that pushed Axl to the limit again and again, fights, drama, chaos. And somewhere in that whirlwind, that crumpled paper with Valerie's words ended up lost, forgotten in a box along with hundreds of other memories from an era that seemed to belong to another life. Until now, Axl opened his eyes back to the present, still holding the Rolling Stone magazine. He got up, walked to his studio, and turned on his computer. He typed the name into the search engine, Valerie Sinclair, Los Angeles. Dozens of results appeared, but none seemed right. He tried different combinations. Valerie S. Troubadour, 1987. Valerie Music, Los Angeles. Nothing. He spent hours searching with an obsession he hadn't felt in years. Near midnight, he changed his strategy. Instead of searching for her full name, he simply searched Valerie Sinclair, Los Angeles social worker, and then he found it. An article from the Los Angeles Times from 2 years ago. The headline read, "Local social worker honored for 3 decades of service to homeless youth." Valerie Sinclair has dedicated her life to offering shelter, hope, and dignity to teenagers on the streets. Axl read the entire article feeling something tighten in his chest. Valerie had studied social work at UCLA. Since 1990, she had been running a community center in East Los Angeles called Soul Refuge, offering free services to homeless youth. Many had fled violent homes. Others had been kicked out by their families for being LGBT. Some had simply fallen through the cracks of a system that didn't see them. Valerie gave them food, clothing, legal help, psychological counseling, but more important than all that, she gave them something no one else offered: respect and listening. The article mentioned that Valerie had survived breast cancer in 2019, but had returned to work just 2 months after finishing chemotherapy. "These kids can't wait for me to be ready," she had told the journalist. "Every day I'm not there is a day when someone else could be lost." Axl kept searching compulsively. He found more articles, testimonies from young people she had saved, and one 8-year-old boy who had lived in his car for a year and was now studying nursing because Valerie helped him get scholarships and support. A 7-year-old transgender girl who had been kicked out of her home and now had an apartment and a stable job thanks to Valerie guiding her through the bureaucratic maze of the social assistance system. Dozens, hundreds of stories like those. And then he found something that chilled his blood. A recent post on a fundraising page. Soul Refuge was in danger of closing. The city of Los Angeles had drastically cut the budget for social programs. Small organizations like Valerie Center were disappearing one after another. She had fought for almost 2 years to keep it open. She had organized fundraising events, written grant proposals, knocked on doors asking for donations, but it wasn't enough. The center had funds for only 3 more months. After that, the 90 young people who received help each week would have nowhere to go. Axl read every word of the fundraising page. He saw photos of the center, an old building with cracked windows and peeling paint. But inside, there was life. There was hope. There were adults who cared. And there was a 5-6-year-old woman who, despite cancer, exhaustion, and lack of resources, kept showing up every morning at 6 to open the doors and prepare breakfast. Axl stayed up all night reading testimonials, a mother thanking Valerie for saving her son's life, a former student who was now a teacher and said Valerie was the first person who believed in him. Again and again and again, stories of lives rescued from the abyss. Meanwhile, he had spent decades in packed stadiums, earning millions, living in mansions, being adored by crowds that screamed his name. But Valerie, the girl who rejected him in 1987 with those prophetic words, had chosen a completely different path. She had chosen the invisible, the difficult, the important. And in that moment, sitting in front of the illuminated screen in the darkness of his studio, Axl realized something that hit him like a hammer. She had been right from the beginning. He had gotten lost. He had forgotten why he started playing music. He had let ego crush soul, and it had taken 35 years and an old magazine to remember the words of someone who saw the truth before anyone else. If this story is resonating with you, leave me a comment telling me what success means to you. The next morning, Axl didn't wait. He called his lawyer. I need to create a foundation. Now, today. His lawyer, accustomed to Axl's urgencies, took notes without asking questions. For what cause? Homeless youth, specifically to support community centers that provide them with direct services. I want to start with one in Los Angeles. Do you have a center in mind? Yes, it's called Soul Refuge. Find out everything about it. Budget, needs, legal structure, everything. 2 days later, Axl had the complete report in his hands. The center needed $250,000 a year to operate properly. Valerie earned barely $42,000 annually, less than what Axl spent on maintaining his vintage guitar collection. The building was a structural disaster. The facilities were obsolete, but inside, something miraculous happened every day. Broken lives found glue. Axl didn't want this to seem like condescending charity from a rock star toward an old acquaintance. So he directly contacted the president of the center's board of directors, a man named Robert Chen. Mr. Rose, this is completely unexpected, Robert said when Axl identified himself. I met Valerie Sinclair many years ago, Axl explained. I just found out about the work she does and the center's financial situation. It's devastating, Robert admitted with a tired voice. Valerie has given absolutely everything for this place, for these kids, and we're going to have to close the doors. What would happen if money stopped being a problem? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Excuse me, what did you say? What would the center need not just to survive, but to become the best refuge for homeless youth in all of California? Robert's voice trembled. Mr. Rose, are you? I'm saying I want to help, but before committing to anything specific, I need to see the place. I need to understand what Valerie does. Can I visit you? When? Tomorrow morning. The next day, Axl arrived at Soul Refuge dressed in worn jeans, a hooded sweatshirt, and dark sunglasses. He didn't want to be recognized. He didn't want this to be a spectacle. The building was on a noisy street in East Los Angeles, between a laundromat and a liquor store with bars on the windows. The exterior paint was peeling in large pieces. The windows had cracks covered with industrial tape. But hanging on the front door was a hand-painted sign that said, "You are welcome here, always. No questions, no judgments." Robert met him at the entrance. He was a man in his 50s, with glasses and an expression of permanent exhaustion. Valerie arrives every day at 5:30 in the morning, Robert explained as they walked down a narrow hallway. She says many of these kids haven't eaten since the day before. She wants to make sure they start the day with something hot in their stomach and with someone who says good morning to them with a genuine smile. They entered a small dining room with mismatched tables, plastic chairs that didn't match, and a smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with scrambled eggs. There were about 25 young people having breakfast. Some looked barely teenage, with faces that still held some innocence. Others already had hard looks, weathered by things no young person should have seen. And in the middle of all that was Valerie. She no longer had the short brown hair from 1987. Now it was gray, almost white, pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her face showed the deep lines of time and battles fought. She was thinner than Axl remembered, even fragile, the visible after effects of cancer. But her eyes still had that same penetrating intensity, that same magnetic presence he had noticed 35 years earlier at the Troubadour. She was serving food and talking to a boy about 17 who had tattoos on his neck and a distrustful look. "Kevin, how did you sleep last night?" "Good, Mrs. V. I got a bed at the shelter on 8th. I'm so glad to hear that. Have you thought more about what we talked about regarding finishing high school?" The boy looked down. "I don't know, it's complicated." "I know it's complicated," Valerie said with a gentleness that wasn't condescending. "But I believe in you, and we're going to work on this together, step by step. Deal?" The boy barely nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a small flash of something like hope. Axl watched from a corner for more than an hour, invisible under his hood. He saw how Valerie knew each young person's name, how she remembered details of their lives, their struggles, their small victories. He saw how some arrived with high defenses and distrustful looks, and left with slightly less tense shoulders. He saw how she never preached, never judged, just listened with total attention that made each person feel seen. After breakfast, Robert took him to a room where Valerie was giving a life skills workshop. She was teaching the young people how to make a resume, how to behave in a job interview, how to open a bank account, how to read a rental contract, basic things that most people learn at home, but these kids never had the opportunity to learn. Most of them come from situations where they never had a stable adult in their lives, Robert whispered. Valerie becomes that first trustworthy person, the first one who keeps what she promises. And for many, that changes absolutely everything. When Valerie came out of the room to take a break, Robert intercepted her in the hallway. "Valerie, there's someone who wants to meet you." She turned, looking exhausted but alert. Her eyes settled on Axl when he took off his sunglasses and hood. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other across 35 years of distance. Then, Valerie let out a small laugh of pure disbelief. Axl rose. "Hi, Valerie." Her voice was cautious but not hostile. "I found something you gave me a long time ago, some words you wrote, and I decided to find out what had become of you." Valerie crossed her arms, not defensively, but as if she needed a second to process this impossibility. "After 35 years. Can we talk?" They sat in a tiny, cluttered office, full of old filing cabinets, donation boxes, and a wall covered with drawings the kids had made for Valerie over the years. She looked exhausted but maintained that calm. Axl remembered. "I read about your work," Axl said, "about everything you've done here for decades." "It's what I have to do," she responded simply, without drama. "Why?" Valerie was silent for a moment, looking out the window toward the noisy street. "Because when I was 20, my younger brother Daniel became homeless. He was 17. My parents kicked him out when he told them he was gay. I tried to help him, but I was barely a college student with no money. The system rejected him again and again. No one wanted to help him. And one December night, he died freezing to death, sleeping in a downtown alley." Her voice didn't break, but Axl could see the old pain etched in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Valerie." "Me too, every day. That's why I do this. Every kid I help is Daniel. It's my chance to fix what I couldn't fix with him." Axl felt a lump in his throat. "That night at the Troubadour, you told me I was going to get lost, that I was going to forget who I was. Was I wrong?" Valerie asked without cruelty, just with genuine curiosity. Axl slowly shook his head. "No, you were right. I got completely lost. You chose your path, I chose mine. But your path was better," Axl said with conviction. Valerie shook her head. "It's not about better or worse. It's about purpose. You gave music to the world, songs that help millions of people feel less alone. That matters. I gave hope to these kids. That also matters. They're different paths, not hierarchies. Your center is about to close." Valerie let out a long, tired sigh. "I know." I've fought with everything I have, but it's not enough. It's never enough against bureaucracy and budget cuts. Axl leaned forward, looking at her directly. What would happen if it didn't have to close? Valerie looked at him with caution and confusion. What do you mean? I want to create a foundation for centers like this, for homeless youth, and I want it to start here, with Soul Refuge. Valerie's eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back by blinking rapidly. Axl, you can't just. I can and I want to, he interrupted firmly. I'm not just going to cover operating expenses. We're going to completely renovate this building, hire more social workers, expand services to include psychological therapy, job training, legal support. We're going to turn this place into a model that other cities can replicate across the country. Valerie covered her mouth with her hand, completely overwhelmed. Why? Why now, Axl, after so long? Axl took the page from the Rolling Stone magazine from his pocket, carefully folded, and placed it on the desk between them. Because you rejected me in 1987, and you were completely right to do so. Because you told me I was going to get lost, and I got completely lost. And because I've spent 35 years focused on my own glory, while you've been here saving lives that society had discarded. He pointed to the message written in the margin. You told me music had to come from the soul, not the ego. Well, the truth is this. You've done more for the world with your empty hands than I have with all my songs and all my sold-out stadiums. And I want to help you keep doing it. 3 weeks later, an event was organized at a community center in East Los Angeles. It wasn't an elegant gala with celebrities, but a gathering of social workers, community activists, families from the area, and most importantly, dozens of young people from Soul Refuge. Axl went up to a small improvised stage, looking nervous in a way rarely seen in him. I'm not used to speaking without a guitar in my hands, he began with a shy smile. But today I need to tell you a story about someone who changed my life without even knowing it. He told them everything. The rejection at the Troubadour in 1987, Valerie's prophetic words, the 35 years of silence, and the reunion that had finally opened his eyes. I've spent decades believing that success was measured in platinum records, sold-out tours, magazine headlines. And yes, I achieved all that. I filled stadiums. I sold millions of copies. I became what the world calls a rock legend. He paused, looking directly at Valerie, who was sitting in the front row with tears silently running down her cheeks. But Valerie taught me something I had forgotten long ago. That true success isn't measured in applause, but in lives touched. Not in magazine covers, but in people who get up because someone extended their hand when they needed it most. He pointed at Valerie with genuine emotion. This woman rejected me when I was 25 years old. And thank God she did. Because if not, I would have been just another distraction on her path. And she had an infinitely more important path to walk. The audience burst into applause. Axl waited for them to calm down, discreetly wiping his eyes. I'm announcing today the creation of the Soul and Purpose Foundation, dedicated to supporting community centers for homeless youth across the country. And we're going to start here, ensuring that Soul Refuge never has to close its doors. More applause, some shouts of joy. We're going to completely renovate this building. We're going to hire 5 additional social workers. We're going to expand services to include mental health therapy, job training programs, and free legal support. The applause intensified. But that's just the beginning. In the next 5 years, we're going to replicate this model in 20 cities across the United States. And I'm creating a permanent fund of $15 million to sustain these centers long-term. Later, in a quiet corner of the room while people celebrated, Axl and Valerie spoke alone for the second time in 35 years. I still feel like I'm going to wake up and this is going to be a dream, she said, wiping the tears that wouldn't stop. It's real, Valerie. Everything is real. But why now? Really, Axl? Why after so long? Axl took a deep breath. Do you remember the last thing you said to me? That music had to come from the soul, not the ego. Yes, I remember. Well, those words haunted me for decades even though I didn't realize it. And when I found you again, when I saw what you've been doing all these years while I chased applause and validation, I realized that you never stopped being honest. Honest with yourself, honest with your purpose. You rejected me because you saw something in me that I still couldn't see. Valerie looked at him with tenderness. I didn't reject you because I didn't like you, Axl. I rejected you because I saw talent, yes, but I also saw deep insecurity. I saw desperate need for approval, and I knew that if I said yes, you were going to seek that validation in me instead of seeking it where you really should seek it, in the truth of your music. And where should I have sought it? Valerie smiled softly. In what you had to say, in the honest rage, in the honest pain, in the honest joy. Not in what others thought of you, but in what you needed to express from a real place. And I think you achieved it, Axl. Your best songs come from that place. Axl remained quiet, absorbing those words. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you ever regret saying no to me that night? Valerie thought about it with absolute seriousness. No, not once. Because if I had said yes, I probably would have gotten lost in your world. I would have become a satellite orbiting your star. And these kids? She pointed toward where some of the refuge's young people were laughing and eating pizza. Wouldn't have had anyone fighting for them. Or at least not me. And do you think you made the right decision? Valerie nodded without hesitation. Absolutely, because I found my purpose. And you eventually also found yours. It just took you a bit longer to get there. Axl let out an ironic laugh. 35 years is more than a bit, but you got there. That's what matters. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind of silence that's only possible between people who understand each other at a deep level. You know what's the craziest thing about all this? Axl finally said. What? That I spent decades thinking that rejection at the Troubadour was one of the worst moments of my life. A blow to my ego I could never fully digest, but now I realize it was one of the best gifts anyone has ever given me. Valerie tilted her head, curious. Why? Because you forced me not to look for emotional shortcuts. You forced me to find my own voice without depending on anyone else's validation. And although I got lost along the way for a while, those words you wrote stayed there, waiting for the right moment to come back to me. Valerie put her hand over Axl's with a maternal gesture. You know what's the most ironic thing? Tell me that I also learned from you that night. Axl looked at her surprised. From me? What did you learn? I saw your hunger, your desperate need to be someone, to matter. And it reminded me of my brother Daniel. He also had that hunger, that need to be seen and validated. But the world rejected him again and again until he couldn't take it anymore. Valerie's voice broke slightly. When I saw you on that stage, so brilliant and so lost at the same time, I decided that I would never again ignore someone who needed to be seen. That I was going to dedicate my life to seeing the invisible. Axl felt tears burning his eyes. So somehow, that night changed us both. All interactions change us, Axl. Even the brief ones. Especially the painful ones. Do you believe in destiny? Axl suddenly asked. Valerie thought about it. I believe in decisions. I believe that rejection was a decision we both needed. You needed to learn not to depend on external validation. I needed to confirm my path. And 35 years later, here we are, having traveled completely different paths, but somehow converging at this exact moment. It's almost poetic. Life is, if you pay attention. Today, 6 years after that impossible reunion, the Soul Refuge model operates in 23 cities across the United States and is expanding to Canada and Mexico. Thousands of homeless youth have found not just shelter and food, but something much more valuable, adults who believe in them and a path forward. Valerie continues working, now as Executive Director of the Soul and Purpose Foundation, training social workers across the continent and advocating for public policies that protect the most vulnerable. Her cancer returned briefly in 2023, but she beat it again with the same fierce determination she applies to everything in her life. Axl finally found something that decades of fame never gave him, a purpose that goes beyond himself. Every year he donates millions to the foundation and personally visits centers, sometimes playing intimate acoustic concerts for the young people. It's the most honest audience I've had in my life, he now says in interviews. They don't care who I was. They care if I'm being real in this moment. He's also returned to writing music, but from a different place. Less ego, more soul. Exactly as Valerie told him almost 4 decades ago. The deepest lesson of this story isn't really about rejection. It's about purpose and timing. Sometimes the people who tell us no are saving us from becoming hollow versions of ourselves. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give us is to force us to find our true path, even if it takes decades to understand why. The fan who rejected Axl Rose in 1987 didn't become a famous groupie or the wife of a rock star. She became something infinitely more valuable. A silent hero for those no one else saw, a voice for the silenced, a tangible hope for the desperate. And the rocker who was rejected learned, 3.5 decades later, that the greatest victories don't happen under blinding spotlights and deafening screams, but in those silent moments when a vulnerable young person finds the courage to keep going because someone believed in them when no one else did. The rejection wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of two paths that needed to be traveled separately before they could intersect with real meaning. And if you made it this far, subscribe to the channel because there are more stories like this that you need to hear. Before continuing, what you're about to hear is disturbing. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only. What follows is based on public statements, archived interviews, and testimonies from people close to Axl Rose during the peak of Guns N' Roses, the band that dominated the rock world in the late 80 seconds and early 90 seconds. The day Axl Rose broke his silence, nobody saw it coming. It wasn't in a planned interview, it wasn't in an authorized documentary. It was in a live stream from his house in Malibu, unfiltered, without managers, without a script. Just him, a camera, and a half-finished bottle of whiskey. For almost 2 hours, he spoke non-stop. And what he said left the rock world paralyzed. "I've carried this for over 30 years, he began. And if I don't say it now, I'm going to take it to my grave. But I don't want to die with this inside anymore." Axl Rose leaned back on the black leather couch. He wore a worn cap, dark glasses, and a sleeveless t-shirt. He looked tired, but not defeated. There was something in his gaze, something that had been hidden for decades behind the stage fury, behind the scandals, behind the image of the uncontrollable rock star. He started talking about 1991, the year Guns N' Roses released the albums Use Your Illusion I and II. Double albums, massive tours, magazine covers, million-dollar contracts. The world was at their feet. "We were untouchable," he said. "We had total control, or so we thought." It was then when he received a call from a record label executive, someone Axl preferred not to name directly, but whose initials he dropped several times during the broadcast. They told him there was an exclusive meeting at a private mansion on the outskirts of Los Angeles. It wasn't a common party, it was a power meeting where covers, contracts, and careers were decided. "They told me that if I wanted to stay relevant, I had to go," Axl recalled. "That the people who really moved the industry were there, the ones who decided who rose and who disappeared." He arrived one October night, accompanied only by his driver. The mansion was hidden behind a hill, surrounded by trees and without signs. At the entrance, 2 men in black suits were waiting for him. They took his phone, asked him to sign a confidentiality agreement, and handed him a silver mask. "All guests must wear it," they told him. "It's part of the ritual." Axl entered, and what he saw immediately disconcerted him. There were legendary musicians, movie actors, Hollywood producers, all with masks, all in silence. The music was low, almost hypnotic. There were candles in every corner and a strange smell in the air, like incense mixed with something chemical. "I didn't feel welcome," Axl confessed. "I felt watched, as if I was being evaluated." A tall man, dressed in a black robe, approached him and extended his hand. "Welcome, Axl. It was about time you joined the family." Axl didn't recognize the voice immediately, but later found out who it was: a producer with decades of influence. Someone who had worked with iconic bands and had connections at all levels of the industry. They took him to an interior room. There was a long table, covered with a dark red tablecloth. Around it sat about 15 people, all with masks, all motionless. In the center of the table was something covered with a black cloth. The man in the robe spoke. "Tonight is about loyalty, about demonstrating that you're willing to cross lines to stay at the top, because greatness is not for the weak." Axl felt a knot in his stomach. "I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't leave. I felt that if I did, everything I had built would crumble. Then they uncovered what was in the center of the table. It was a human skull, or at least it seemed so. It was decorated with embedded stones and engraved symbols. "This represents sacrifice," the man said. "The sacrifice of the old to be reborn in the new. Whoever kisses this skull will be blessed with eternal success." One by one, the guests stood up and did it. Axl watched in horror as figures he admired, people he had listened to on the radio all his life, knelt and kissed that object without hesitation. When his turn came, he froze. "I couldn't do it," Axl said with a broken voice. "I stood up and said no, that I hadn't come for that my music didn't need rituals to be real." The silence in the room was crushing. The man in the robe approached slowly. "Are you sure, Axl? Because once you reject this, there's no going back." The doors close. Axl nodded. "I'm sure." He left that mansion that same night. He never spoke again with anyone who was there. And from that moment on, everything changed. The following weeks were strange. Axl noticed that his manager started acting different, more distant, more evasive. The interviews he had scheduled were canceled without explanation. The contracts that were almost signed remained up in the air. "Nobody told me anything directly," he explained, "but something had changed. It was as if I had been marked." One day, one of his guitarists, someone he trusted, confessed something to him in private. "Axl, there are rumors. They say you rejected something important, that you didn't follow the rules. And that has consequences." Axl asked what kind of consequences. The guitarist only said, "Your name doesn't sound the same in the offices anymore. Now you're a risk." That was the first time Axl understood that it wasn't just about music. It was about control, about loyalty to a system that operated in the shadows. They don't fire you. They don't publicly cancel you. They simply stop opening doors for you. They isolate you until you become irrelevant. During the following months, Axl began to notice patterns. Bands that used to respect him now avoided him. Producers who wanted to work with him suddenly had other projects. Even some of his own bandmates began to distance themselves. "I felt betrayed," he admitted. "But worse than that, I felt alone. Because I knew that if I spoke, nobody would believe me. And if someone believed me, they would also be marked." Axl revealed that he tried to move forward as if nothing had happened. He composed new songs, planned tours, gave interviews, but something inside him had broken. "I wasn't the same. The rage I used to use to create now consumed me. I became paranoid, explosive, and the world thought I had simply gone crazy." He started drinking more, fighting with everyone, canceling shows without apparent reason. The press said I was a diva, that I was unstable, but nobody asked why. Nobody wanted to know what had happened to me. One day, in the middle of a tour in Europe, Axl had a breakdown. He was in his dressing room, alone, looking at himself in the mirror. "I saw a stranger. I didn't recognize myself. And in that moment, I knew that if I continued like this, I was going to die not physically, but inside." He decided to withdraw. He didn't announce an official retirement. He simply stopped appearing. He stopped doing interviews, stopped getting on stages. He took refuge in his house, surrounded by few trusted people. "I needed to heal. I needed to understand what had happened to me and why it affected me so much." Years passed. Guns N' Roses continued to exist, but without the same energy. Axl came out from time to time, played some shows, but he was no longer the same. People thought I had lost the passion, but it wasn't that. I had lost my innocence. During that time, Axl began to investigate. He spoke with veteran musicians, with people who had been in the industry since the 60 Seconds and 70 Seconds. And they all told him the same thing, that what he had experienced wasn't an isolated case, that those meetings had existed for decades, that many of rock's legends had gone through the same thing. Some accepted and became legends. Others rejected and were erased from history. And a few, like me, remained in limbo, neither inside nor outside. Axl mentioned that he even had contact with the family of a deceased musician, someone who had spoken publicly about industry control before dying. They told me he tried to warn others, that he left recorded messages, lost interviews, but nobody took him seriously until it was too late. It was then that Axl decided that someday he would speak, that he wasn't going to die with that secret. But I was afraid of what could happen, afraid they would call me crazy, afraid nobody would believe me. And so he lived for years, silent, watching from afar as the industry kept functioning the same, seeing how new generations of artists fell into the same traps, seeing how the system remained intact until today. Axl explained that what motivated him to speak was seeing other artists begin to break the silence. I saw young musicians talking about abusive contracts, manipulation, control, and I realized that if I didn't speak now, I was being complicit. He said that for years he carried the guilt of having stayed silent. I thought about all those who came after me, about those who maybe went to those meetings because nobody warned them, and I wondered if I could have prevented that. If you've made it this far and want to keep discovering stories nobody else tells, subscribe to the channel. But he also clarified that he doesn't regret having rejected what they asked of him. I could have had more success. I could have been bigger, but I would have lost my soul in the process. And I prefer to be a fallen rock star than a puppet at the top. Axl spoke about how that night at the mansion changed him forever. It didn't just destroy my career. It destroyed my trust in people, in the industry, in everything I believed was real. He revealed that for years he had nightmares, that he saw those silver masks in his dreams, that he heard the voice of the man in the robe telling him, "There's no going back." I would wake up sweating, feeling like I had made a mistake. But then I realized that the mistake would have been staying. He also spoke about how it affected his personal relationships. I couldn't trust anyone. Every time someone approached me, I thought they were part of the system, that they were watching me. I became a hermit. His closest friends told him to seek help, to go to therapy. And I did. But how do you explain to a therapist that you rejected a pact in a secret mansion, and that's why your career collapsed? It sounds like madness. Axl said what hurt him most was seeing how some of his own bandmates distanced themselves. Not because they hated me, but because they were afraid of being associated with me. Because they knew I was a problem now. One of them told him privately, "Axl, I can't be around you. It's not personal, but I have a family, I have contracts. I can't risk it." That broke me, he confessed, because I realized that the system was stronger than any friendship, than any loyalty. Axl also revealed that he tried to talk to journalists on several occasions. I told them what had happened. Some listened attentively, but in the end, none published anything. They told me they needed more proof, that it was too dangerous, that it could ruin their careers. That's when I understood it wasn't just me, it was everyone. Everyone was afraid. For years, Axl took refuge in music, but in a different way. I no longer composed for the masses. I composed for myself, to heal, to understand. He wrote dozens of songs that never saw the light. They were too personal, too raw. They talked about things the world wasn't ready to hear. One of those songs, he said, was called The Broken Pact. It talked exactly about that night, about the mask, the skull, the choice. But I never officially recorded it. I knew that if I did, it would be my end. Axl also mentioned that during those dark years, he thought about suicide more than once. Not because I wanted to die, but because I didn't know how to keep living with that weight. I felt trapped between two worlds, the one I left and the one I could never reach. But something always stopped him. I thought about the fans, about the people who wrote me letters saying my music had saved them. And I realized that if I gave up, I would be betraying them. Axl explained that over time, he learned to live with the pain. It didn't disappear, but I learned to carry it differently. I stopped seeing it as a curse and started seeing it as a test that I still had some humanity. He also started to completely distance himself from the industry. I stopped going to award shows, stopped seeking validation, because I realized that the validation I was looking for came from the same system that had destroyed me. And in that process, he found a kind of peace. It wasn't the life I imagined, but it was mine, and it was real. Axl said that for years he watched other artists go through the same thing he did. I saw young musicians arrive with all the energy in the world, and in a few years be empty, and I knew exactly what had happened to them. Some contacted him privately. They asked me if what was rumored was true, if those meetings existed, and I told them the truth. But most didn't believe me. They thought it was paranoia from someone who was no longer at the top. That also hurt me. because I knew they were going to fall into the same trap and there was nothing I could do. Axl revealed that a few years ago, a young musician visited him. He told me he had been invited to a private meeting, that they had told him it was a unique opportunity. He asked me if he should go. Axl looked him in the eyes and told him, "If you go, you'll never be the same again." And not in a good way. The musician didn't go, and weeks later, his contract was canceled. He wrote to me saying I was right, that he had lost everything for not going. But he also thanked me, because at least he kept his soul. That conversation made me realize that speaking did help, even if it was to save just one person. Axl also spoke about how technology changed everything. Before it was easier to hide things, but now with social media, with leaks, with people speaking openly, the system started to crack. He said that in recent years, he saw how more and more artists began to talk about similar experiences. Not always in the same way, but with the same background. Control, manipulation, strange rituals. And I realized I was no longer alone. That the moment to speak had finally arrived. Axl explained that he decided to do it now because he feels it's his last opportunity. "I'm not young. I have nothing to lose. And if I don't say it now, I'll take it to my grave." He also said he does it for all those who couldn't speak, for those who died silent, for those who were destroyed and forgotten, for those who are still trapped. This testimony isn't just mine, it's for all of them. Axl took a long pause. He took a drink of whiskey and looked directly at the camera. Hollywood, music, entertainment, everything works with the same rule: obey or disappear. And I chose to disappear rather than obey. I could have been bigger, I could have been an untouchable legend, but I would have had to sell myself, and that price was too high. He said he doesn't expect everyone to believe him. "I know many will think I'm crazy, that I make things up, that I'm seeking attention, but I don't care. Because I know what I saw, and I know what I lived. And if a single person who hears this decides not to enter that mansion, then it was worth it." Axl also spoke about the emotional price he paid for decades. "There are days I wonder what my life would have been like if I had said yes that night. If I had kissed that skull, if I had closed my eyes and simply obeyed like everyone else." He was silent for a moment. "I probably would have more money, more awards, more recognition. But every time I looked in the mirror, I would have to see someone who sold the only thing that really matters." Axl revealed that in those years of isolation, he also lost important relationships. Lifelong friendships vanished. People I thought would always be there disappeared when I needed them most. And I don't blame them. The industry has a way of making you choose between loyalty and survival. He recalled a particularly painful conversation with a close friend. He told me, "Axl, I can't keep defending you. People ask me why I keep talking to you, and I don't know what to answer anymore." I asked him what I had done wrong, and he said, "Nothing. That's the problem. You didn't do anything you were supposed to do." That phrase haunted him for years, because he was right. In that world, doing the right thing is considered a mistake, and doing nothing when they ask you is the worst crime of all. Axl also spoke about specific moments when he felt the weight of his decision. "There was an award ceremony where I had been nominated. I was sitting in the audience and I saw how all the other musicians greeted each other, laughed, hugged, and nobody approached me. It was as if I were invisible. At one point, one of the presenters made a joke about artists who mysteriously disappeared, and everyone laughed. I knew they were talking about me. Not directly, but the message was clear. This is what happens when you don't play the game." But what affected him most wasn't the industry's rejection, but the silence of those who knew the truth. There were people in that room who were with me that night, who saw the same thing I did, who felt just as uncomfortable. But when they left there, they chose to forget. They chose to pretend it never happened. And I was left alone with the memory. Axl described how paranoia took over his life. "I started seeing signs everywhere. Every time a project was canceled, I thought it was because of them. Every time someone stopped answering my calls, I assumed they had received instructions. And maybe I was right. Or maybe I became so obsessed that I saw it even where it wasn't. That's another way they destroy you. They don't just isolate you, they make you doubt your own perception of reality." He also revealed that he tried to return to the big leagues several times. I thought that maybe if I waited long enough, if I behaved well, if I showed I was no longer a threat, they would let me back. So I accepted small projects, did minor collaborations, tried to rebuild bridges. But there was always an invisible ceiling. I could get to a certain point, but never beyond. It was as if they had put a ceiling on me that I couldn't break through no matter how much talent I had or how hard I worked. Axl confessed there were moments of weakness. There were nights when I thought about calling that producer, telling him I was ready, that I had been young and naive, that now I understood how things worked and that I wanted a second chance. He stopped and shook his head. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered his eyes that night, the coldness, the certainty that he had me exactly where he wanted, and I hung up. Because I knew that if I went back, I would no longer be me. I would be a hollow version of myself. And I preferred to be nobody being myself than someone important being someone else. Axl spoke about how he found comfort in unexpected places. I started hanging out with people outside the industry, people who didn't know who Axl Rose was or didn't care. And it was liberating. For the first time in years, I could have real conversations. I could laugh without feeling like every word was being analyzed. I discovered there's life beyond the stages, and that life can be just as meaningful, even if it doesn't come with applause. He also found refuge in art in other ways. I started painting, writing, not to publish or sell, just to express myself. And I realized that during all those years at the top, I had never really created for myself. It was always for the audience, for the critics, for the executives. Now I was finally creating freely, and it was addictive. Axl explained that he learned lessons he would never have learned if he had stayed at the top. I learned about humility, about gratitude, about what it really means to be successful. Because success isn't how many records you sell or how many stadiums you fill. It's being able to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize yourself. And for years in Hollywood, I didn't recognize myself. I was a construction, a character, a brand, but I wasn't me. He revealed that the decision to speak now wasn't impulsive. I thought about it for months. I spoke with my family, with my close friends, with a lawyer. They all told me it was dangerous, that there could be legal consequences, that I could ruin any chance of ever coming back. But I came to the conclusion that there was nothing left to lose, and that maybe, just maybe, my story could help someone else not make the same mistakes I did. Axl looked directly at the camera with renewed intensity. To all the young artists who are listening to this, when that invitation arrives, and believe me, it will arrive if you have enough talent, remember that not everything that glitters is gold. Some of those sparkles are chains. They're going to promise you the world. They're going to tell you it's just one night, that it's just a symbol, that everyone does it. And technically they're right, everyone does it. But that doesn't mean it's right. He paused. They're going to make you feel special for being invited, like you've been chosen, like you've finally reached the inner circle. But that circle is a trap, and once you enter, it's almost impossible to get out. Axl ended by saying something that resonated deeply. The industry doesn't take your voice away suddenly. It turns it off little by little. First, it takes away your platform, then your credibility, then your dignity. And when you have nothing left, they convince you that you never had anything. But I still have my voice, and today I use it. The broadcast ended. Axl turned off the camera without saying goodbye, without background music, without effects, just silence. In the following hours, the video went viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Some supported him, others attacked him, but nobody remained indifferent. Because Axl Rose, the man who was once the king of rock, had just done something more dangerous than any song, tell the truth. If you made it this far, leave your comment and subscribe for more stories like this.